Okay, so in this video I want to go over something that's probably long overdue, but it's actually just about how to print your surgical guides. So we've gone, a lot of my videos cover the steps on, how to actually create guides or whatever objects you're trying to make, and then how to process them after you're printing. But we probably don't spend enough time on the actual printing. So here we go. I want to go through a few of your different options and see if that helps clear up some of the confusion and help you be as efficient as possible with your printing. And not only efficiency. Efficiency is important as far as printing, not wasting time and not wasting resin, but there's also about predictability. So we want to make sure that prints don't fail as well. So some things you do might make things faster, but you might lose out on the predictability. So I've got 4 guides here, all fairly different guides. This first one I've got up here is a full arch guide with some stabilization pins, 5 holes for implants, and it's a full arch case essentially. So that's one guide. And now I've got here would be my second guide that we're going to go over, which is just a standard number 19 tooth extraction, healed site. But so yeah, this is that guide, pretty straightforward quadrant guide. And now this guide right here is going to be a number 9 tooth replacement, so anterior implant placement, a little bit different than a quadrant. You can tell by the shape, that what's different about it is this is more of a straight guide up here, and this is curved, so it'll bring out its own little complications. And then lastly is another quadrant type guide, but it's actually a canine. It's a lower right canine, number 27. And we're going to talk about how we treat that one as well, and it's got multiple options. So, okay, so first and foremost, the full arch guide. This guide, let's hide all the rest so we can really focus in on this one. It's got a lot going on. It's got some stabilization pins that are more in the horizontal direction. It's got the implants at more vertical, but at varying angles. So there's a lot going on with this guide. So what's the best way to print this? Can we print without supports? Can we do, horizontal, vertical, all the above? In my opinion, this is the one example where I don't even bother. I don't mess with anything. I just go right to printing with supports. You can try. There are ways to print this without supports, but I'm not even going to cover that in this video just because it's too complex to cover in this video, and I don't know that it's worth it to most people. So if you're printing a guide like this, hopefully you're not rushed. You've had plenty of time to work up this case. You should have time to get it printed, and it's going to be one of the longer prints, but I would just go ahead and print it with supports. So let's hide that one. Let's move on to the next one. And this is a quadrant guide. So we're going to work on printing this one vertically, okay? So if we had a printer bed visible, it's going to be stacked 90 degrees. So let's go ahead and just for visual sake, let's see what that looks like. We're trying to print like this, okay? And let's rotate it a bit. So now, this is how we're aiming to print this guide. And whether you do it at a bit of a cant is up to you. I tend to rock it back just like this. Okay, so let's turn on the grid just so that we can get our bearings a little bit. So, sorry about that. So this is how we're printing this guide. So to do so, it's pretty quick and easy. We've designed our guide in whatever software you're using. The software I used for this guide design was Blue Sky Plan. It's the one I recommend. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that as this prints, it's going to print one layer at a time, higher and higher and higher. What we don't want to do is we don't want to accidentally have it tipped like this, where if you look, this area right here is actually below, or let's exaggerate. This part right here is not connected. Okay? So it's going to have an issue right here printing, and we really don't want to encounter that issue if we can avoid it. So make sure that when you're orienting your guide, you just keep an eye out for that. These gradual slopes will print just fine, not worried about that, but keep that in mind. Okay, so once you've accounted for any sort of overhangs like that, you should be good to go. We'll hit stop on the transform tool, and I apologize, I didn't mention that. Hitting T for transform, or you can go to edit, transform. So you orient that the way you want it, and now we can hit cancel, hit edit, planecut, and so this is going to cut off whatever we don't want, we're going to discard. So I'm going to slide this all the way back, and I'm going to look underneath, and I'm going to make sure there's a pretty good amount of surface. This amount of green right here is a pretty solid surface. It'll adhere to the build plate really well. It should support, it should print just fine. So I'm going to hit accept. So now I've got a guide that I can adhere to my build plate like this, and it will print one layer at a time and should be pretty predictable. So here's the catch. This part of the print, the first few layers, and for instance the Form 2 printer, it's about the first 2 millimeters, and for the Moonray S, it's about the first 1 millimeter. So basically, just remember that these first few layers, the printer is going to over cure that part. It's going to cure it more than is necessary so that it really adheres to that build plate so it doesn't fall off. So these areas tend to contract a little bit, and so it could be a tight fit. The simple quick fix to that is if I hit the S button, or select, S is just a shortcut, hover right over top of this green and just double click. It only highlights that. Let me walk back through that for a second. If you hit click once, well, it's selected up along the sides, and now you double click, it has those sides as well. So we don't want that. We're just trying to get the green. So again, either make your little selection spot small, or all you need to do is double click and that color will all be highlighted. Now all we need to do is to you can either use the transform button or just say extrude, which is D for the shortcut. And I'm going to say -2 on the millimeters, enter. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. We're going to say 2 millimeters. And now that has now taken the place of that first 2 millimeters. So when it cures, when it prints, this area is not accurate on the guide. We will take that with your handpiece or your model grinder and just trim that piece off. Okay, so I'm going to leave that right there. This is the end of that guide. Now actually I will do one more thing. I'm going to come up to File, Export, or hit Control E, and I'm going to call this Quadrant Vertical Print Ready. Just for our own little understanding here as we go through these files. Make sure that your file type is binary, STL binary. You do not want ASCII. We need binary, and it's about 1/6 the file size. Okay, so that's exported. Let's hide that. We're done with that one. Let's move on to the anterior guide. Now this one is a little bit tricky because if we tried to stack it on end, let's kind of picture that. Let's do this for a second. Let's turn it, and then let's try to stack it on the end here. It's going to be very hard to not have an overhang. I would have to slice it like this, which really limits a lot of the, where it's on teeth. You could do that, but I'm just not a fan of doing that. Plus, the way I'm going to show you how is actually significantly faster. You'll see how significant later when I show you the actual print software. But for now, for this guide, I'm going to turn it just for visual sake. And if we bring it down to this grid and bring it right down here, okay, let's hit accept. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the plane cut once again, the same way as we did last time. And we're going to bring this down until we can see a good surface, big flat surface that's going to print on. Now, once again, I talked about earlier that 1 millimeter rule. This guide, by default, from Blue Sky Plan is 3 millimeters thick in all areas. Notice that it gets a bit thinner here than there. So you can either turn the model by hitting transform, but really that would kind of that would take a lot of time. So instead, I'm just going to use the little toggle right here. Okay, and that's about it. Now, if I want, I don't really need this much surface area for it to adhere well, so I'm going to bring it down and probably right about there. That's going to be plenty of surface for it to adhere. No real thin, super thin spots. Let's hit accept and we can really visualize that. Looks pretty thick there, thick here, thick on the distal ends. If I'm printing with my Moonray, I'm probably going to leave it as is. Now, if you're printing with Form 2 and you want to make sure you have that 2 millimeters, if you need, or you have a more awkward arch where it's not quite as straightforward, well, in that case, we can do the same thing we did with the other one. Double click, double click, double click, double click, and then hit D for extrude. Make it, we'll say 1 millimeters, assuming we have enough, within there to cover the other 2 millimeters. All right, and so now I can hit accept and print it just like that. Now in this case, you don't have to grind off these parts because these aren't going to affect the fit. The other one, the distal end, was going to affect the fit. So this is just going to give you a nice flat surface. And one of my favorite things about this is when I place this in the patient's mouth, this gives me a nice flat surface for me to rest my fingers on. And it's actually pretty remarkable how useful that is. Okay, so I'm going to turn off that. And this is the last one, and this is back to that quadrant guide. So this one can be printed a couple ways. It's a little bit awkward because you might want to try to print it vertically. So let's move it and let's see if we can get it oriented just right. Okay. Now it's got an overhang here, so we want to turn it back. And so we could probably get away with printing this guide like this. It's a little bit funky, but I think you'd have success. Now, as I'm going to show you in a little bit, this is a very tall print, which means it's going to take a while. It's also not going to give us that flat, placement for our fingers, and so it's on the Form 2. It's not going to really matter time-wise, but again, I'll get into that in just a little bit. So instead, on this type of guide, I'm actually going to go ahead and print it horizontally. Now, it's more complicated, so if you don't feel like messing around with this, that's fine. And the idea is not to waste time doing all of this. So if it's too much work for you, if you don't think you can move quickly through it, then just don't. Okay, Control Z. I accidentally... I'm going to leave it like that, hit accept. Now, what I'm going to do is, I don't want a plane cut yet because in this type of guide, it's using the direct cut drills. So this little rim right here is actually important. My implant handpiece is going to hit that. And if I try to just do a plane cut right now, it's going to be hard, potentially, maybe not, but it's going to be potentially hard to keep some of that intact and still have enough area for it to adhere to the print platform. So instead, I'm going to cheat a little bit. What I mean by that is I'm going to hit the S button, select, dial this up a little bit. We'll say up to 48, yeah. And I'm just going to highlight this whole area, coming right up to there, to that drill stop. Okay. Now, I'm kind of picky. I end up pressing the B button to smooth the boundary. It is not necessary, but I do it just so it gives me a nice smooth edge that's going to be extruded. So now I can simply hit D to extrude. We'll say 1 millimeter. Should be more than enough. Change it to flat. And see, flat rarely works because it's on two different planes here because there are two different selection areas. If you have one solid selection area, it works, but since we weren't able to do that, the flat is irrelevant. So I'm just going to leave it as offset, and I'm going to dial it up because we're not having to plane cut this significantly. So let's just call it 6 millimeters. Hit accept. And so now I can come in, go to edit, go to plane cut, drop this down. Let's get a little bit below that drill stop. And in fact, I might actually clip just a little bit of the drill stop. It's going to be, I've still got a good amount of it that's going to be there for my own reference while printing, or while during surgery, but it's going to give it a little bit of support. I believe in this guide itself, when I did this surgery, I did have it unsupported, and what ended up happening is, if you look right here, this area dips down below, so it won't print anyways. So we want to have it contact just a little bit. So with that in mind, I apologize, but I'm going to take a little bit of your time, because when I'm making these videos, I tend to notice things while I'm going along, and something to actually improve this whole process. I'm going to hit Control Z. I'm going to go all the way back to my selection process. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Select, and I'm going to pick one little area right here of this. Control Z, Control Z, and I didn't want to reselect. I liked all that selection. Okay, once again, hit B to smooth. Hit D to extrude. Let's call it 6 millimeters again. Hit accept. Now, edit, plane cut. And now I can put this pretty much anywhere I want, because this little part right here is, well, you can't really see it with that little widget there. I'll just go ahead and hit accept. So now this little guy right here is going to support it as this becomes progressively gets printed. So now we've got a guide that can be printed horizontally. We don't have to trim anything, and we don't have to worry about any sort of weird overhangs. Well, I guess we did. We addressed that one. So once again, let me go and let's export this. I didn't export the second one. This one's going to be the Anterior Horizontal Print Ready. Let's hide this. Let's turn this one back on. Let's export this. This was a Quadrant, or this is the oh, I'm sorry. This is the anterior one. Let's rename, let's save that. Overwrite that. This one that we just did, export, was the Quadrant, but it's going to be horizontal. Don't worry about my naming. I don't mean this for this part to confuse you at all. This is just I'm going to bring these guides up in the software. So this one right here, this guide, we didn't do anything, but just so that they're all in the same folder, I'm going to go ahead and export it again, and we're just going to say full arch. Supports print ready. Okay, so we now have this little folder with these guides, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to show you how I would set these prints up. This is pretty quick and easy. Let's go ahead and just drag all of these in here. Well, no, let's not do that. I don't want to cause too much confusion. Let's go ahead and bring the full arch. Okay, so now how am I going to print this guide? Well, I'm going to be using supports. I don't want the supports coming into here and to the inside of the guide. It's not a big deal, but it is going to be where you're trying to have it fit the patient. So instead, I'm going to rock it back a little bit, and that was the X, Y, Z axis. That was a bit too much, and that was 90 degrees, so I'm going to go negative 30 degrees. And I think I want to move it even more than that, negative 30. Okay, so right there, let's go ahead and move this. So now you can see that this is vertical, this is vertical. There's nothing, no overlaps. Everything should be fine. We prefer to have holes be horizontal or perpendicular to the build plate. But when you've got 7 different holes, 9 different holes, when you include these, it's unlikely that you're going to have all of them in the perfect orientation. So we're just going to accept that. Now I'm going to come down here to supports. I'm pretty consistent with the low density and low strength. Generate supports. And you're done. And this guide is ready to print. So certainly the fastest, it didn't require any manipulation, it was print ready. The problem is this extra height that it's adding right here, and all of this, well, the extra height is what's going to make this print last longer, take longer. It's also going to require more resin. It's waste. The resin's inexpensive. I'm not too worried about that. But it's also more work because now I have to break off all the supports and go through all that. So that it works. Complex guides, it's worth it. But the other guides, as I'll show you, are a little bit faster and easier. So I'm going to delete this just so I don't clog the window as much. Now let's go ahead and do that quadrant vertical. Let's drag that in here. And, oh, sorry. This is the original. This is in the modified folder. Quadrant vertical print ready. Okay, so we got that flat surface right here. We're going to move this around. Let's click, we're going to come to here. This is the rotation orientation. Select base. And if you look at this little cursor, wherever I put it, it's going to align it 90 degrees to that, or perpendicular. This flat area, there it is. Okay. So that is now print ready. This is going to take approximately, change this to surgical guide, 100 micron resolution. It's we'll turn off the enhanced surfaces, doesn't affect time. It's an hour and 39-minute print. Still not a ton of time, but it is time. So let's that's it for printing this one. You hit go and you're good to go. You can see that it works really well because you can see it sort of overlapping right down here. Okay, let's delete that. Now let's bring in the anterior horizontal, and let's see how fast this one is. The rotation, select base, click right on the flat end. This red screen means it's just sticking out of the print platform. Turn that off and move this over here. Okay, so it's no longer red. You can see it intersecting through there. It will adhere to the build plate. Let's look at the time. This is now a 28-minute print. So it's roughly 1/3 of the time to print because it's nowhere near as tall. And the Moonray prints one layer at a time, not one pixel at a time. So when it's so much taller, it's so much longer. Okay, so 28-minute print, very easy to set up. No need to add the supports, we're good to go. And last but not least, let's do the quadrant horizontal. So for instance, if we had done that distal plane cut, making it a vertical print, it would be a little less maybe after we cut it off, but you're still looking at maybe an hour and a half long print. Well, instead, the way we have it running, because we have done this horizontal plane cut, come here, select base, click on this flat end, let's hide that, and we are now down to 28 minutes. So it went from an hour and a half long print to a 30-minute print. That's, for me in my office, is significant. If you're printing overnight, it doesn't. Who cares? It doesn't matter. But if I'm printing same day, or I just don't want to sit there and wait for my printer, I want to move on to a different project, different resin, do something else. I like the speed and efficiency. Okay, so that's it with Moonray software. I'll quickly go through the same exact steps in the Form 2 software. So let's move this folder over here this time. Let's bring in the full arch. I hope my software doesn't crash. I don't know why. It's probably my computer. It's nothing else. But I've been having some crashes with the Form software. Okay, so let's rotate this a little bit. This little widget right here is actually being added to the Rayware software. It's just not in the one I'm using on this computer. But so now I've got it oriented about the same way. I should say this gimbal, as it's called. Let's generate supports. We can dial it down from there. I'm just going to go ahead and show you the general process. Hit generate supports. And so now you've got all your supports there, and you are good to go. Click here. All right, so that is ready to print. That's a 2 hour and 15-minute print. That's impressive. Actually, I would have expected it to be longer. Okay, so next thing we'll do is, sorry about that, I should just, I'll cancel that. I'm going to mess with that. Let's delete that one. Let's go to the Quadrant vertical printing. And it's already been oriented. It's not because the software knew, it was just because the it just happens to be that the 3D environment is 90 degrees different from the Mesh Mixer software, and it just happened to be, it worked out. I actually don't trust it. It might be fine, but sometimes you get yourself into trouble if you assume that it comes in perfect. This one looks pretty darn perfect, but even if it is, I don't trust it. I never do. Just click select base and good. Now I know, because if it's off even half a degree, it's going to fail most likely. So just always go ahead and select it just to be safe. It's just not worth the risk otherwise. Okay, so this print is a 3.5 hour print. So I think we were talking about an 1.5 hour print on the Rayware software, 3.5 hours. I want to point out, it's not about a comparison there, but I want you to see what happens when we do a horizontal print on the Form 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and for comparison, well, I'll have to delete this. 3.5 hours. Well, let's just do this. Just so you can see, if you had printed at horizontal, it goes to 2 hours. It's not quite the 1/3 the time like we did when we used the Rayware, just because Form 2 it prints essentially 1 pixel at a time. So the time savings is significant, 3.5 down to 2 hours, but it's not 1.5 hours down to half an hour. So just a little bit difference in the way the technology works. Delete that. Let's go to the anterior horizontal. And you can see this one didn't come in perfectly. You certainly wouldn't want to miss that. Think it looks good. Is it down there? No, it's not. So select base. Let's just click somewhere to get it. And there we go. And this shows a 2 hour print. Okie doke. And that's all good. That's ready to go. And then last but not least, let's bring in that quadrant horizontal. Excuse me. I hope I covered my mic well for that sneeze. And this looks, well, it might be perfect. I think it is probably, but again, I don't trust it. So let's just click here, click there, and now I know. And once again, it's roughly a 2 hour print. I think it's just not estimating the minutes very well. I don't know if it's just plus or minus. That's why these last 3 have all said 2 hours. It's just a very rough estimate. So that's it. That is it for how we get our prints ready to print efficiently and well supported. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I hope this helps.